In this session, we'll be looking at the open movement. Publicly available digital resources have reached a critical tipping point. We have arrived at a juncture where consumers, businesses, governments, and citizens now have access to an unprecedented amount of information, and that information is being used to create entirely new dynamics in business and in society. All industries are now able to take advantage of a wealth of knowledge stored in publicly available repositories. And what has this done? Well, it has spurred an unprecedented level of innovation as individuals, groups, communities, businesses, even countries are now using the power of the internet to drive what is being called the open movement. But what exactly is the open movement? Well, it's difficult to put a single definition on it because it is not exactly one thing. The open movement is an umbrella term that describes a number of overlapping and interrelated movements that collectively support the idea of a free and open society. And it covers sectors or areas such as arts, education, government, computing, research, technology, medicine, copyright, and other areas. In just a few short years, for example, the open source encyclopedia Wikipedia has made closed source encyclopedias obsolete. How many of you remember the hardbound kind of encyclopedias such as Collier's and Britannica, or even the CD-ROM form such as Encarta? These have all been completely eclipsed by the emergence and widespread global popularity of Wikipedia. Sure, these companies still exist, but their customer base is rapidly shrinking as more and more people would rather go online to Wikipedia. It's free, it's easy to use, and it's much more up to date. If you consider 20 years ago when you had to stock your bookshelves with encyclopedias, any change in government's histories, geographic boundaries, would not come out until many years after, because the publishing process, the process of not just changing the text, but printing and distributing was vastly different. Remember, one of the characteristics we said about digital information is that it is infinitely changeable. Digital information is manipulable. And this is where we see it operating in very real terms. So now Wikipedia can be managed and maintained by a global army of content writers, creators, historians, experts, and they can ensure that anytime you go onto Wikipedia, you always have access to the latest information. This is unprecedented. But this is only one example of how the concept of the open movement has changed our lives. Over the next decade or so, we'll be seeing many more examples. Some of them you will be creating, as the effects of this change impact just about every area of life. Now, the goals of the open movement are very similar to those of other movements that have the open tag to it. You would hear terms such as open data or open source or open standards being applied. And all of these initiatives, all of this openness is fueling new levels of innovation. Let's go to one site. This site is appropriately called opendefinition.org to find a definition for open data, for example. The site opendefinition.org says that a piece of content or data is open if anyone is free to use, reuse, and redistribute it, subject only at most to the requirement to attribute and share alike. A piece of content or data is open if anyone is free to use, reuse, or redistribute it, subject only at most to the requirement that you identify the source of the original material and you agree to share it in like manner. So within the open data movement, the term open data is used to describe this notion or this ideal that certain data sets should be freely available to anyone or freely available to everyone to use and republish as they wish, without restriction from copyright, from patents, or other mechanisms of control. Now, internationally, Recognition of the economic and social benefits derived when such access to information is facilitated has led to the emergence of what is popularly known as the open data movement. In countries as varied as India, Kenya, the United Kingdom, Moldova, the potential value bound up in open data sets is being unlocked by creative developers. Now remember, we are inside of the CAPE Digital Media Syllabus, and we will be looking at ways and opportunities to use digital media here in the Caribbean, but also to use digital media in ways that allow us to impact the entire world. And that is why an examination of the principles of the open movement and the principles of open data are so important. A lot of the content that we see others taking advantage of in other jurisdictions, for example, you drive to a foreign country and you use GPS navigation. If you consider how GPS navigation works, it depends on a number of open data sets. It depends on the availability of maps that say where things are. It depends on the availability of an open repository for business information that says that this building that I'm passing by is a pharmacy or a supermarket or a gas station. It depends on open GIS systems or geographic information systems that say there is a hill or a hump or a bridge here. And a simple application like a GPS navigation tool actually can only function if the information that it puts to you is openly available. Now, if you consider the fact that we have just as much need for GPS navigation here in the Caribbean, or we have just as much need for understanding where roads and bridges are, or where health facilities or emergency evacuation facilities are, then you begin to see the importance of having access to these open repositories. So it's not limited to developing world issues, or it's not limited to foreign countries. The open movement and open data has application everywhere. And just as other countries have seen the potential value bound up in open data and have unlocked it by creatively applying development skills to create applications that allow a wider and wider audience of people to benefit from it, those same benefits can apply right here at home. So remember, the movement is not limited to governments. The open movement is not even limited to software developers. Financial institutions, charities, non-government organizations, universities are other repositories of information that can open their data sets to the general public. The more groups, the more areas, the more facets of society that see and then act on opening up their data sets, the more benefits we can derive. The more opportunities there exist for developers to write applications that meet specific niche needs that are very local but offer very global benefit. Now, with all of these benefits, of course, there are also some issues that attend open data. There are reasons why governments and businesses are reluctant to share their information. But there are also many reasons why they should share it. And what I would like you to consider are the laws and the platforms that can facilitate open data initiatives. Because with the right laws and with the right platforms and frameworks in place, we can provide citizens across the region with new means to ask for, with new means to demand, and with new means to create greater transparency for our institutions, for our governments, for our private sector. And this is important. And I'm saying this because I want you to link the digital media movement to a new social responsibility. You can't write the applications, you can't develop the programs if you don't have access to the tools. Remember, we referred to the digital media ecosystem as being a combination of platforms, tools, systems, people, and interactions that all combine to allow us to reap the wonderful benefits. The open movement and open data in particular is an important part of supplying the content that developers need to build the applications that meet real local needs. So what are the types of open initiatives? I'm just going to list a few, and there are many that you can research as well. There is open source software, or OSS. There is open education, which is a collective term that refers to educational organizations that are trying to eliminate the barriers of entry in the education sector. There are open education resources, or OER, and we're seeing a number of new organizations and companies and tools coming up that offer open courseware or open distant learning. But there's some other interesting areas such as open gaming, where groups are saying that they've had enough of the proprietary gaming platforms like the Xbox and the PlayStation and the Nintendo platforms, and they want to create new platforms where anyone can write software and anyone can write and can develop hardware that run open games. There is open science, there is open research. There are now massively open online courses, which is essentially online courses aimed at large-scale interactive participation across the World Wide Web. You can explore other areas where the open movement has impacted and is changing the way people interact with data and with each other. What I'd like to look at now is one specific area, one that I believe is very important to the digital media field, and that is the open data movement. What is the promise of open data? I'm going to list a few. Open data can improve transparency. Now remember, as I go through this list, think of the application. When we say open data can improve transparency, in what area? We know it can improve transparency in government if governments were to make more information about different aspects of the services that they supply to their citizens. We definitely know that if we knew where land was available, or if we knew how much was spent on what aspect of national development, or if we know which officers and which ministries were spending what money in which areas, it would help us to hold our government officials more accountable. But they would have to supply that information in a format that we can write applications for and build websites for. So the promise is that open data improves transparency. That promise can only be realized when the data is available and when applications are built that provide access to that information. A second promise is that open data harnesses innovation. It harnesses information. Let me use the same example of a government making its data repositories available to its citizens. You can have an exercise in your school or in your community where you take that now newly available information and determine what aspect of it you are most interested in, and write an application that gives that access to the entire community. For example, sometimes we live in communities where the road signs may not be all that proper. And because of the absence of proper road signage, or because of the absence of smooth roads, for example, there are a lot of accidents. You can use open data to determine what parts of the country have the most accidents, by which areas, in which communities. You can tie that to open data that deals with the roads, but you can also tie it to open data information that comes from the protective services that says these are where accidents happen. And then as a developer, you can create a map of your country or your community that says these are the hotspots where the most accidents have occurred over the last period of time. Now think about it this way. As a citizen, this is information that is supposed to be publicly available, and it exists somewhere in a filing cabinet or on some physical record. If that information were available digitally, as a developer, you can create innovative ways to make it accessible to the public, so that an ordinary member of society can log on to a website, for example, or use their mobile phone to see these are the intersections that I need to be most careful by. You can use the road open data information, cross-reference it against a police report of crime and robberies, and create a map of hotspots. These are the trouble spots within my community. These are the places where I'm most likely to see chains grabbed or purses snatched. These are the areas where I'm most likely to see somebody killed by gunshot. The information is public information, but it's not truly public until it's open. And it's not truly public until somebody writes the applications that make sense of the data. And you can consider it this way. That data is meaningless until you give an interpretation of it that makes it knowledge. If you have the data and you can see where the trouble spots are where accidents happen, where crimes are committed, where opportunities exist, then you now have knowledge that you can act on. You can have knowledge as a citizen, knowing where to pass, where to go, at what time of the day. But you can also have knowledge as a government or an organization, knowing where markets are, where issues that need to be addressed are untended. A good example of this, again, would be taking an open data repository of roads, bridges, culverts, and so on, and allowing citizens to say, this bridge is broken, this road has a pothole, this lighting pole is leaning. Public information overlaid with developer application to provide a new citizen service. That's the promise of the open data movement. Without the data, the applications can't be written. Even if you had the greatest interest in writing a civil society app, without access to that information, you would not be able to know what is your right to know. So, we can also say the third promise of the open data movement is that open data creates entirely new and significant business models. And I want to draw a reference again to something that is very commonplace in other jurisdictions, but not so commonplace here. GIS maps. And the fact that companies like TomTom or Garmin can spring up, building an entire commercial enterprise on the availability of publicly available information. Their component or their contribution to it is the development of their navigation software. That same opportunity exists here at home, where developers, young entrepreneurs, young innovators can take advantage of these unique opportunities we have right here at home to create applications and build businesses around them that build upon the availability of open data. Now remember, when we say it creates entirely new and significant business models, we're getting again to this issue of innovation, which is an underpinning aspect of this CAPE Digital Media Syllabus. We don't just want to create digital media, we want to create new, exciting, creative, and innovative digital media for the Caribbean. But what's the difference between creativity and innovation? You can have a bright spark of an idea, but how do you bring it into being? That's innovation. Innovation is when you can deliberately bring into being something that is original, something that is unique, something that is novel, but most importantly, something that has inherent value or utility that can be replicated and sustained. It's not sufficient to have a good idea today, but have it fade tomorrow. The real innovation is in our ability to create stuff that we can manage, develop, expand, and enhance for a long time to come. That's innovation. So if you're thinking about the kinds of uses you can apply to open data, you also have to think about the kinds of systems that you have to put in place to make sure that you can continue to build on your applications and build on your products. And that's why it's so important for us to understand the open movement. Because if we're going to build applications that depend on somebody else supplying data to you, then you have to have a say, a voice, a stake in them continuing to supply that information. You don't want a case where you're depending on traffic information today, governments change, some election happens, and the new government then says, well, the previous administration shared information, but we are not of that ilk. This is the real world, people. And part of our responsibility in creating our new digital reality is that we have to understand our responsibility to make change permanent. Make change permanent doesn't mean that things never change after we change it. It simply means that we're committed to not seeing it reverse to what it once was. So if we say we're moving toward new opportunities for open data in the region, then it means we're also saying at the same time that we're moving to commit ourselves to being advocates for open data in the region. It means that we're going to place demands on those who now hold publicly available information so that they can understand that we need that information to create the kinds of innovations that we are seeing in other parts of the world that we have a right to have right here at home. So, innovation requires activators, people being able to identify with their notion or their vision of what they want to see, the kind of opportunities they want to seize, and the kind of environment that they want to exist in, to take that vision and to prioritize it over other needs and other concerns and then direct their energies and their activities to making it happen. Innovation needs activators. But innovation also needs systems. Systems for providing a correct framework for this innovation culture to be birthed and existed. But remember, if innovation is about sustainability, then it's not sufficient to birth a new innovation culture. It has to be secured. It has to be nurtured. It has to be developed so that it can flourish. Now, if we want to see these things take place, then we have to define what our, let's call it this, our open innovation ecosystem can be. All right, so we're looking at open movement. We're looking at the opportunities that exist in having data available so that we can build new applications and new services. But we're recognizing that this has to take place in a much wider context. That context we are now describing as the open innovation ecosystem. And the ecosystem has these parts in it. Has the people, the developers, the users, the innovators, the entrepreneurs, the content owners, the content distributors, who will be responsible for creating our new digital media reality. But that ecosystem must also have the tools. If I put information out there and say it's open for you, you have to have the tools to take advantage of it. To drill into 10 years of government data, to drill into 15 years of police and security information, to drill into a decade of information about where different buildings and businesses have been registered and created across the area. You have to have the tools to dig into it. We have to have the content. It has to be right, it has to be accessible, it has to be properly structured and formatted. We also have to have, as part of this open innovation ecosystem, the applications. The government support in terms of creating an environment that protects the owners of information and the policies that secure our ability to reuse it without fear and without any kind of negative unintended consequence. And of course, all this requires leadership. It requires new sensitivity, not just at the level of the digital media creators, but across the board, across the full spectrum, where our businesses know that if we do this, we are not just exposing our information, we are literally creating new opportunities in which our markets can grow, in which our profits can increase, in which innovation can be truly spurred on. And of course, it needs access. Something that we must never take for granted inside of this digital world, where the assumption is that we're going to access content that is available online, is the issue of access. People need access to the internet. They need proper access. They need fast access. They need affordable access. So if you're playing inside of this open innovation ecosystem, you have to know your responsibility is not simply to exist in one box, but your responsibility is to understand how all of the boxes interrelate and the role and responsibility you have to making sure that the elements that you need as a content creator and as an innovator are present. You have to be an advocate for the change that you want to see. The open data movement and the open movement generally has been taking strong footage in developed as well as developing countries. And people are increasingly deriving real benefits and value from open data. The private sector is also joining in. As we said, you have companies like Google, like Open Flights, like Coursera, all offering their services and offering data sets that people can use and take advantage of. Also happening across the world and increasingly here at home is the spreading of the word about the open movement. The Caribbean recently held its first open data competition and event to create awareness and raise public understanding of the value of open data. This is consistent with other competitions, code fests, and awards taking place across the world. So if we have to advance our own regional open data movement, we have to understand what are some of the obstacles to adoption and some of the obstacles to innovation. I want to list 5 key barriers to open data innovation here at home. 1, lack of familiarity with the model. A number of people are still not completely cognizant or familiar with what is open data and what benefits can come from it. A second barrier is lack of evidence of the benefits here at home. We're seeing many benefits around the world, but skeptics are still saying that we're not sure that this will have the same kind of impact here in the Caribbean. Third barrier, perceived challenges to ownership, control, and monetization. Governments, private sector firms are still very reluctant to open their data sets because of the question marks that still exist around who owns the data if I make it open. Who will be responsible if somebody manipulates it in a way that is not beneficial? What about the publicity or the bad publicity that can come from exposing the truth about what's really happening at a statistical level? These are real fears and real concerns. I don't really want the people to know how we are dealing with roads or responses to service requests or what's happening with crime. Real concerns in a real environment. There's also uncertainty about how to leverage open data. And there's really, at this stage, not yet a critical mass of interested developers. These are all areas, these are all barriers: the familiarity, the evidence, the perceived challenges, the uncertainty, the lack of critical mass amongst developers. These are all areas that we have an opportunity to change as we press deeper and deeper into this CAPE Digital Media Syllabus. And as you, in your classes and in your teams and in your communities, look at ways in which you can use open data to create new applications. The good news is problems always have solutions. With open data innovation and with your being able to take advantage of open data, collaboration is key. You have to lead by example in your communities. Even if there is not a huge interest in open data today, by your actions, by your interest, by your involvement, by your vocalizing your needs, you can lead by example. Remember, initiative is required from our innovators. And you are now being charged to take initiative to create new opportunities and new applications for open data. Allow those around you to know that you can do so much more if the data that you need is made available. You can build applications, you can create new opportunities. I want you to be excited as innovators and entrepreneurs, and I want you to start with what you have. Look around you and see where open data sets can be used to create new portals of sight into your world. Engage the media in your area. Allow them to understand what you're trying to do and what you can build if only you had access. And so create a new conversation, a new debate, a new discussion around the value of open data and its linkage to creating a new Caribbean digital media landscape. So, I'm charging you to promote with a passion, but also to promote with a strategy. You have to create the opportunities and make sure once you go down this pathway that you openly celebrate your successes. Let the message be heard, cause your voices to be heard, and allow your applications to give the entire society new windows into the data that they have a right to own.